Well, in 1919, I was born in 5, so I was 13. There was a barnstormer with an OX-5 Jenny that used my uncle's field for a landing field, carrying passengers. When he would finish up for the day and everybody was gone, I would go out and get in the airplane and move the stick around, act like I was flying the airplane. I think it was in 1920 or 22 that I was down on the beach at Seaside, Oregon. My girlfriend and I were walking out on the beach on a Sunday morning, and there was an OX-5 Jenny there that the fellow was warming up the engine, getting ready to carry passengers. He was charging $5 a piece. And I said, well, I've got $7. You got any money with you? And she had $3, so we put the $10 together and went for an airplane ride. Portland didn't even have an airport at that time, and they had to use Pearson Field over at Vancouver for the airmail. So I got a job as station attendant, and I took instruction from some of the airmail pilots. They had a reserve plane there, an OX-5 Waco 9, and I took instruction from the pilots and soloed there in 1927. Mr. Gorse started the Seattle-Bremerton Air Ferry in 1929, and we flew between Seattle and Bremerton, used a loaning amphibian, 7 passengers in the cabin and a pilot and co-pilot, but we used to put a passenger up in the co-pilot seat. The fare was $2.50 each way. Some days we'd just have them lined up waiting to get in the airplane. We had so many passengers. It was didn't cost them very much to make the trip, and only took a few minutes, so they seemed to enjoy it a lot. Well, in 1929, I took the airplane up to Alaska and carried passengers, and it was very popular up there at that time too, because in Juneau, one Sunday shortly after we were there, we carried passengers all day long, charging $5 and $10 for a little bit longer trip. When they finished up in the evening, we threw it out on the bed at the hotel and counted the money, and we had $995 in one day. And Mr. Gorst pulled out another $5 bill. He said, hey, let's make it $1,000. Later on in the summer, Cordova, Alaska wanted an airplane up there for the July 4th celebration. So we made a trip from Juneau to Cordova, 4 hours and 20 minutes. It was the first commercial trip across the Gulf of Alaska. If we had trouble, we had to make the repairs ourselves usually. A person would just start out on a trip if the weather was okay, and you'd have to take a chance on the weather. If you couldn't get through, you'd stop at some little bay or some Indian town or something. Wait till it improved, and then be on your way. But the people that you were carrying, they understood that too, and there wasn't anything else you could do. So that's the way you had to play the game. We were in Cordova, and Mr. Gorst wired us from Seattle to go to Juneau. So the mechanic and I started out real early Sunday morning from Cordova. The weather was real bad, and I couldn't get across the Gulf. So after about an hour and a half, I turned around, went back to Cordova, and we gassed up, and that afternoon the weather improved some, and I took off for Juneau again. About halfway across the Gulf, the engine sounded like a rock crusher. The the ceiling was only about 1,000 feet, and we were following the beach along, and right at Icy Bay, it's when this engine started making so much noise. I knew it was going to have to land, and there was ice in the bay, floating ice, so I had to land in the ocean. And as soon as it landed and it got off the step, the waves were quite large, and it smacked the lower wing and knocked 6 feet off of the lower wing. And I was fairly close to the beach, and the engine was still turning over, and I taxied up on the beach. And the wind was blowing, and it was stormy, and we tried to save the airplane. The waves were breaking over the tail surfaces on the beach. So we turned the airplane around and let the wave break over the bow. And in the meantime, the wind picked up, and it was lifting the plane up and smacking it down on the beach. And about 2.5 or 3 hours, it had knocked the other wings off and turned the airplane over on the side, and a big wave come along and tossed it up high on the beach. So we sat there watching an airplane break up and so forth, nothing you could do about it. We stayed on the beach that night, and then the next day we found a cabin not far from there and walked around there, and we were there 3 days before they sent out another airplane to pick us up. The plane just came up the beach looking for us, and when they saw this cabin, we were outside the cabin and waving at them, and we had a sign printed in the sand to drop food and send a boat from Yakutat. But the floating icebergs were out of this channel right at that time. And this was Bob Ellis was the pilot, and he was flying a Lockheed Vega on floats. He landed in there, picked us up, took a couple pictures, and we were on our way to Cordova. In '33, I went to work for United Airlines as a co-pilot from Portland to Salt Lake. It's kind of an odd thing, the way they check you out and so forth. In other words, I went on I think it was a Friday afternoon or Friday morning, I reported down to United Airlines at Portland Airport. They said that I was due out that night as a co-pilot. They had one fellow there that showed me around the airplane, the 247, and I started asking questions and so forth. And I guess I asked him too many questions, and he said, "Well, hell, don't ask me." He said, "I only started yesterday." So the first night out of Portland, we only had one passenger, and we'd only been in the air about 15 minutes going up the Columbia Gorge at 10 o'clock at night. And the pilot said, "I'm going back and have a cup of coffee." So he left me in the cockpit, and he went back and had a cup of coffee with the passenger. And I thought to myself, this is really something. This is a great way to run an airline. Well, when I was flying this a small loaning in 1932, going up through British Columbia, I landed in a bay, Carter Bay, and Mr. Boeing was there with his yacht, and I offered to take Mr. Boeing for a little ride so he could see some of the lakes around the territory there. So I took him for a ride, and then we had lunch on board. I picked up the mail that he had going to Seattle, and some of the guests with him. And that's how I got a little bit better acquainted with him. So when he wanted a pilot, in the next year, I flew for him in the summertime, and then he decided he wanted to get an airplane for himself. So he bought a Douglas amphibian because Boeing didn't have anything that fit the picture, and I flew for him personally for 8 years. Mr. Boeing personally owned 2 Douglas airplanes for his personal use. It's kind of odd right now to see Boeing buying the Douglas company, and here he started it that many years ago. I worked for him, and then I went to work for the Boeing company as a test pilot. The Boeing company was doing a good job because the B-17s were in very good shape, and we had very little trouble with them in test flights. The production got up to 7 and 8 and 9 a day. Sometimes we'd have 35 or 40 airplanes sitting on the field ready for a test stop. So as soon as the weather cleared, we just hopped from one airplane into the other, fly about an hour and a half each airplane. We'd have a lunch on board the airplane and just keep flying till we got rid of them. It was a great airplane, and I enjoyed flying them very much. I flew roughly about 1,000 test flights. The B-29, we thought that was something. Sitting back in the cockpit so far from the nose of the airplane with all that cage up in front of you, it was something different. But after you flew them for a while, you got used to it, and it was another good airplane at that time. When he got up to the B-52, I thought that was a Cadillac of the air. It was so large and it handled so easily, and so. The Boeing company has always built a real first-class airplane, and their inspection has been exceptionally good. Every airplane was an advancement, so that we always look forward to a new airplane coming out and the idea of flying it, because we knew the performance was better and all the way through. The 727 was in production when I left the company in '66. Retired, and I've had a small outfit on the Renton airport since then where I put airplanes on floats. The Boeing company wanted a replica of their first airplane built. They wanted it for their 50th anniversary. So I put 3 or 4 people to work and took the contract and built the airplane in a very short time. We got the airplane out, and I flew it for them. I flew it up over around New York and the Statue of Liberty. They got a lot of pictures of it there. Then shipped it back to Seattle again. Tex Johnson was flying what they call the Dash 80. It was during the boat races on Lake Washington. They were out flying that morning, and I guess they had permission to make a flight across the course. When he came over the course, he pulled it up into a slow roll, and that surprised everybody. Nobody expected to see that. And he went up north and turned around, came back south, and did the same thing again, southbound. and it was quite a show at the time with a brand new airplane. I understand that the Boeing executives and so forth, some of them were out on watching the boat races. They didn't think so much of it at that time. I was bringing a 195 Cessna down from Edmonton, Alberta, and over the Cascades, why the engine quit. I switched gas tanks, and I tried to do everything I could to pick up the engine again. Nothing had happened. I had to land, and it was a little bit cloudy, but there were holes in the clouds, and I could see the trees down below. And I picked a big tree that I thought I could mush the airplane into, and I stalled the airplane right into this tree, but the airplane went right through the tree and knocked the engine out, damaged the airplane quite a bit, and knocked me out. The seat in the airplane pulled out, and I went right into the instrument panel and cut up my face pretty bad. In the meantime, I guess it knocked me out for a few minutes because the fuel from the upper wing tank had leaked out of the cap It ran down the wing and hit me in the neck, and the back of my neck was all saturated with gasoline. And so, but anyway, I stayed in the airplane that night, and then I had to hike out the next morning. From then on, I attached the seat belts to the structure and not to the seat. Still at it, still have a license. The doctor says I'm okay. I feel okay, so why not? It's something I enjoy doing and feel at home. I enjoy seeing the country. Pretty hard to beat this country that we're living in up here.